Hello, everyone. I'm here with JJ Sutherland, the author of the books and CEO of Scrum Inc. It's very nice to have you here. JJ, thank you for your time and for joining our community.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm hoping we will have a kind of open chat, fireside chat format during this conversation to share your experiences, your thoughts, maybe some insights that were based in your books or your father's book are very welcome. So I'm going to start with very open question.
Sure.
Which is, times are changing. That's a kind of Captain Obvious thing, but the world is changing fast, and especially the IT industry, which is accelerating day by day. And as you said in your book, it will become impossible to wrap your head around what will come next. And now, when it comes to Scrum, in a word, does the Scrum respond to a changing world?
So the whole point, or one of the whole points of Scrum, is that it's a tool to allow you to change and adapt and evolve to the real world, whether it's an IT of, okay, it's the marketplace, the products are changing, the technology is changing. And what Scrum really does is say that everything will change. We know that, right? It's just, especially in the IT industry, things change overnight. ChatGPT, for example, still blows my mind. And so it's, how do you pivot? And what happens in traditional project management, often the people will lay out a 3-year plan or a year plan. You have to have some sort of long-term plan, but it's and they fall in love with it. And it's very hard to change. And it's very hard to change that plan. What Scrum does is, often I say, it reduces the cost of changing your mind. Because having a sprint cycle, be able to change the product backlog of what you're going to do each sprint, allows you to react and pivot. A good example of this I was just thinking of is, which is going to be coming in the new edition of one of my books that's coming out in the spring, is John Deere during the pandemic. So their supply chain services group, which does IT tools for managing John Deere's supply chain, which, as you can imagine, it's like 20,000 vendors and lots of different parts. They were able to shift how they were sourcing the parts, finding those, everyone remembers the chip shortage, how they were doing it in response to the pandemic change in the whole supply chain. And so they were really able to pivot quickly, more quickly than many of their competitors, so they never ran out of chips. They never stopped their manufacturing because they were able to pivot even as that supply chain changed overnight. And that is one of the ways they did it. And they did it really by saying, okay, the way we used to do it isn't working anymore. Next sprint, let's try something different. Hey, can we try something different? Of course, they didn't get it right the first time. It took iteration over and over and over and learning as things kept changing during the pandemic.
Okay, got it. We reflect into the future. However, what I can see in the background is kind of old school thing. Can I see the post sheets there on the wall?
Yeah.
Do you still guys do it traditional way?
Of course, we have tools, right? And they're all tools, but I really like Post-its. I mean, I actually copy them from the tool onto Post-its because I like moving things around. I mean, the thing about tools is, they're all limited by the fact that you have to go look for them, and you have to log in, you have to pull it up, you have to see it, and for me, the best is an information radiator. So I walk into my office in the morning and I see that door and I'm like, okay, I know the state of everything. I know where it is without having to log in, and I can just walk by my, the people in the company who work here, they can walk by and just see what's on my backlog, what I'm doing, what the state of the work is, and they can lobby for something else to be on there without having to go to a meeting or a tool or anything. So it just radiates information. Plus, it just feels good to move Post-its around. Sense of accomplishment.
Get it. To me, and I think to many people, Scrum is actually, this is the point, Scrum is the art of changing the possible. However, like in our rapidly changing today and uncertain future, does the framework itself, or maybe the basic knowledge coming from books like this, or the from the Scrum Guide, does it require the certain update? Are you guys working on that?
So my father and Ken Schwaber, they're talking about, but a lot of it is sort of a refinement of how they describe it. But the basic framework of Scrum is pretty simple, right? There's something like 12 pages, something like that, and it's the practices. Like if you're doing, medical devices, or you're doing, pharmaceuticals, or you're doing, manufacturing of tractors, those are different things, right? So it's going to look a little bit different, but at the core, that 3-5-3, the 3 roles, the 5 events, and 3 artifacts, that's pretty common. Doing that is just basic. And so how those practices come into the world, like how do you incorporate AI? I know a couple of teams that are having an AI listen to their Scrum events and then say, okay, here's what I see. Oh, your velocity is this. Here's the impediments I see, and just create almost as a helpful team member. And that's different. But the 3-5-3 is having a robot in there is weird, just an evolution, and and the pace of change of that is just incredible. So, but that how it's used changes based on domain, based on technology, based on platform. I was talking, this is a couple of years ago, but some teams at Facebook or Meta now, I guess, and they were talking about that some of the teams I was working on were working on the hardware layer, because they're like, okay, all the software developers shouldn't have to worry about, is it on iPhone? Is it on Android? Is it on a PC? Talking to all these different chips and doing that. They just want to have a translation layer. So they're like, working on the hardware layer is really technical, right? It's really tough. And you have to know, and you have to constantly update as new devices come out, and it's a pain. And so, but what they do, and they sort of have a longer timeline than say, hey, I'm going to update, I don't know, how you can click on someone's, feed and like it or something. That can change really rapidly. Like you can change that kind of stuff overnight. Like who cares, right? It's just, but there's this translation layer, and they're both using agile techniques. But one, in terms of a software update, can really move really, really fast. But if you're doing, machine language and you're doing chip architecture interfaces, that's a lot more complicated and takes longer than, just changing a toggle.
True, indeed. On the 30th anniversary of Scrum, I have attended this webinar you guys organized. It was back in June, I guess, where you were present, your father, Jeff, and Ken. And what I have understood talking about this rapidly changing technology, that you actually encourage Scrum Masters and teams to use AI. Do you?
This is the thing about Scrum. I'm a radical pragmatist. Anything that works. I've seen, in any tool, AI, I think is just the same as any tool. It can be used well and help, or it can be used poorly and not help, or it can help in some situations, but not other situations. And in terms of AI, and again, I think this about most tooling, is it can be really helpful in certain circumstances. It can not be helpful. And so it's when you try, I think one of the things that's happening right now is people are like, okay, it'll solve every problem. And I don't think it solves every problem. I think it can help. And and as it continues to evolve and change, and all of us have to figure out how to deal with a world that has, these, incredible machines out there, how do we adapt to it? But it's not, the solution for every problem. It's a solution for a lot of problems. We can use it a lot of different ways. So yeah, if it helps you, use it. If it doesn't help you, don't. That's my attitude.
Simple as that. Okay, but Scrum is also used outside of IT. Although I don't know many examples, but I think your organization, Scrum Inc., has a great experience in it. So could you maybe share some stories, short but unusual examples, maybe more traditional industries where Scrum has been introduced and has been successful?
So I was thinking when we were talking about doing this fireside chat, two really came to mind. So there's one company that we work with, which I can't, none of this, I can't really give the names of companies, but they work on safety systems for large trucks, right?
Okay.
And and those are pieces of hardware that have to stop the truck, in case an 18-wheeler doesn't run off the road. So there's a lot of regulation, there's a lot of hardware there, and so what they look at is they say, what pieces of that can we do really fast? How do we learn quickly? And how do we? So there's both regulatory, it's hardware. They look and they try to figure out what parts of that hardware they can model, what parts of this hardware they can change a lot. A lot of what the key in the hardware space is modularizing the product. And so just like in software, a tightly coupled product is really hard to change, hard to update. It's hard to decide you're going to do it a different way. I mean, if you have everything, any software engineer knows this. And this is sort of revolutionary for hardware and manufacturing people, where it's like, well, why? If you have, I was working with this one company, one of the private rocket companies, and they had this problem where when to fix something in their engine, they had to take the whole engine apart because it was inside. And I don't know anything about how to make a rocket engine. I'm not a rocket scientist. And I was just like, well, why don't you put that, if you have to change that a lot, why don't you put that part on the outside? So it's easy to get to. And they're like, oh, maybe that's a good idea. And it's sort of just, thinking about how the product is structured, because just like in software, the architecture of whatever you're building is going to determine how people interact with it, how the engineers interact with it, the organization of the teams. The architecture defines organization both in terms of product architecture, but also in terms of organization architecture. The other area I was thinking about is in one area is in medical device implementation. There's a company that we work with in our consulting group at Scrum Inc. that does human implantable medical devices, like things that go in your heart, things like that. And so I was talking to the lead for the new edition of the book that comes out in the spring, one of the lead engineers there, and he says, listen, it's really hard in medical devices because it takes 5 to 7 years to make something. And he said, you know what? And there are parts of that I can't make faster. Safety testing, all this kind of stuff, government approvals, all of that kind of stuff. So like doing human safety testing is going to take a year, and I can't accelerate that. But he said, at the beginning of the process, when we're doing a lot of the design where it's easy to change stuff, which does take traditionally 18 months, that we can shift and make a lot shorter because we're iterating and designing and stuff. And so then we can throw it over to testing, because, with medical devices, you can't test you can't do continuous integration with medical devices because you don't want people to die. So so we can take it from 5 to 7 years to 2 to 3. So it's still going to take a long time. But where in that development process can you accelerate it? So it's like in the design part, also in some of the design of the tests, and then also in terms of a release, how do we get manufacturing? So it's where is it easy to apply Scrum and Agile techniques to accelerate those parts of the process? Some you can't, but usually you can do more than you think. The other place I would say that is being used a lot, where I'm doing personally a lot of work, is in government space. And this isn't a technology or product at all. This is, how do you serve the citizen? Like there's one government that we're working with that said, listen, our citizens are really frustrated with how fast we react and provide them the services that they need, that their taxes are paying for. And we see it as, our obligation to make that faster, because that's not good. And so they are figuring out and it's not just, like creating an app. Like where I live in Washington, D.C., it's awesome. You can report everything from trash pickup to, rat problem or whatever through an app. But it's not just creating an app. It's how do the actual people, like for trash pick, this happened to me just a couple weeks ago. They didn't pick up the trash. So it's, how do the service people interact with the technology to come and deliver those services? It's not just creating technology, it's creating organizations that can respond rapidly when they get requests. And so I find that very interesting because it's hey, how do we pick up the trash better? How do we get a complaint and then serve the citizens of our city faster and better? And they in the country I'm talking about, they see it as as we all know that there's in democracies around the world, there's a lot of stress and a lot of polarization. And the people I'm working with are not politicians. These are civil servants that are professional civil servants. Their career, they're not involved in they're implementing policy. And they say we have to make government accountable and we have to make government better because that will engage citizens more in their democracy because they feel that government is responsive. And that can be really basic services. Because if they say, oh, man, to get a passport, it's going to take this right now in the U.S. It takes months and months and months to get a passport. There's a huge backlog. Don't even know why, but it's sort of people are just like, oh, they throw up their hands. Well, that's the government. It's going to take me 6 months to get a passport. I have to go stand in lines, and it's just sort of this, and then that sort of infects the attitude of government's slow, corrupt, bureaucratic, never works. I'm just frustrated with it, even though I pay my taxes. So it's kind of inciting to me. It's like, okay, how do we say, oh, if I interact with my government and I want something, they're responsive. I believe that my government works. That's cool. And it's not necessarily in politics. It's just basic services. Can I get a passport?
Yeah, I got it. It's very much about the priorities as the Scrum is. Let's stop on the priorities because I feel many people have a great challenge with prioritization. And I came back to the origin of the word prior, which means first. And making things simple, first is first. It's not second on another in the order. First is first. So while Scrum is a priority-based work approach, if so, then who or what indicates what has to be done first?
Actually, the Latin, it comes from the word a priori, which means it comes before. And that's and you can't have 10 things that come before. It's just actually I did like a Google Ngram search for the word priorities in English, and it wasn't even a word until like the 1940s because it didn't make sense to have more than one. But the struggle with people have with prioritization is, of course, there's a lot of things that people want to do, right? Any organization, we want to do this, we want to have this product, we want to have this service, we want to market this, sell that, whatever. But on a team level, it's like, well, what are the people who are actually doing the work? What are they going to do next? And without a clear sense of priorities, your strategy is going to be decided by the most junior person in your organization because they get to pick what to work on, right? If there's 10 priorities and there's some junior engineer, it's like, okay, I finished one of my tasks. I got to look at what's the next one. Oh, there's 10 priorities. Oh, this one looks interesting. And it might not be in line with the top priorities of the business goal. So who decides that? At the team level, it's the product owner. And you know what? People are like, oh, we have to have the right priorities, whatever. And the product owner job is hard. But you know what? You guess. And, and we were talking about that change earlier, is living in ambiguity is you guess what the right priority is. And then you do a release or you get feedback from a customer, and then it educates the product owner on what the right priorities are. And that product owner role, often it's interesting in Scrum teams and Agile organizations, a lot is like, oh, well, the engineers get to decide, what the priorities are, what the, how to do it. And the engineers do need to get to decide how they're going to approach the problem. But the product owner decides what the problem they're going to approach is. It's not a democracy because you need at a sort of leadership level, okay, they're the ones who are seeing the marketplace. They're the ones, whether it's internal or external, what those needs are. And they need to be able to drive the behavior of teams in serving that. How do you get the prioritization at a leadership level? And how do you know, and we want to make clear that the perfect world is you have like a golden thread. Leadership says, this is our strategy. This is what we want to focus on. And then down at the team level, you have the engineers looking at it and going, I know how what I'm working on fits into that prioritization at the leadership level. Because because often they don't. So that's what you really want to do as a leader. And then also as a team member, it's just a lot clearer. And what it does is it drives down thrash of just what do I do next? What's the most important thing? And everyone's sort of, we've all sat in meetings talking about it and theorizing what leadership wants. Or I've been in leadership meetings and people are like, why aren't the engineers doing what we want them to do? They're building all this stuff that we don't care about. And getting that clear stops all of that just waste of lack of clarity.
Yeah, but like as you said, leadership, creating the right environment, it's very much about the culture, empowering people, passing that ownership to the product owner, supporting him with the business requirements. Totally agree. However, things got complicated over last 2-3 years, and we all, as we now talk, we all work in distributed teams, and some of these teams, they are created ad hoc for the projects, like even overnight. And these people, they bring very various experiences related to use of the framework, and also to an understanding of the framework. So maybe you have a kind of golden ticket to a Scrum Master. What approach you would recommend to a Scrum Master for bringing them together?
Well, there are a few pieces. First of all, working in a distributed environment is hard, whether you're doing Scrum or not. It's just, and so what a Scrum Master needs to be conscious of is how do you build a team? Because there's tons of research on just teams, not just teams in general, humans, that working together and becoming a high-performing team takes time. It just takes time. We all know this. We've all joined teams. And if you're constantly putting together these ad hoc teams, and sometimes you have to, but everyone should know those teams will be slower than teams that stay together. And so my advice is as much as you can, and again, I don't want to say this is the rule and you have to do this, besides the 3-5-3, you can do different things. As much as you can, as is possible, don't bring the people to the work. Hey, we have new work, we're going to put together a new team and they're going to go tackle this, whatever. Instead, have a stable team and flow work to them. And if new things happen, you just change that backlog, change that prioritization. Those teams, even in a remote situation, will be the more stable teams are faster teams. The more dedicated they are. If people are like, oh, I'm 30% on this team and 50% on this team and 20% on that team, fractional assignment. Again, the research is really clear. That makes teams slow, like really slow because of the context switching, right? I have to think about this, now I have to think about this. I'm working with this person, now I'm working with this person. And how does that work? We got to remember. So again, that really makes teams slow. Slower than if they're stable, they stay together, they're dedicated. They're also, in the Scrum guys, they don't have teams bigger than, 8 or 9 people. Because again, the research is very clear, larger teams than that are slow. Now, there are times people are going to have to do that, right? Just reality. But as a Scrum Master and as a leader, as an Agilist, make sure you're conscious of the cost of your choices. If you do that, it's going to be really hard. Now, some of the teams that I've seen working in a very distributed way I'm thinking of this one video game company, just got a big release. And they're, of course, like any video game company, are doing constant patches to their release because, stuff's broken.
Yeah.
And what they've done is they've set up basically, they have, Europe, the Americas, Asia. And so they can actually work 24 hours a day. And the key there is thinking about how they do it is it's transparency. So the next team has a little bit of an overlap. They have it download and the backlog is really clear. Everyone can see it. And of course they use a tool like Jira or, Trello or what, I don't know what tool they use, but they use something. But it's really clear what the priorities are, really clear what the handoffs are, really clear, what the interface is between those teams. And they're able to do it. And they've been really successful at, patching their game very, very rapidly because they're doing this really fast. But it's transparency of what is the work? What state is the work in? What does it mean? And what level of quality or, whatever, when one team hands off to another team, that's always where things break, right? You can do handoffs. Okay, so define that interface. What does it mean when you hand off? What's the definition of done for one team that meets the definition of ready for the next team? And so they've decided what those interfaces are. They've designed them ahead of time. And so that way they can rapidly go through it. And is it perfect? Of course not. But the know what those interfaces are between the teams, know what the expectations are of what the state of the software, the product or design or whatever is, an API or whatever it is, what that is expected to do, and what the input and output of all those teams are. And they're able to work around the clock because they have teams across the globe. Now, that's hard. It's a lot easier if everyone's in the same room. It just is. But, as you just said, we all work. But again, if you're in a distributed team, think about how does the team work together? Let's get a team working agreement. How are we going to work together? Let's talk about that. What are the interfaces we have with other teams? Let's talk about that and define that really clearly. How do we know what the priorities are? How do we know what state the work is in? Who's done what? So we don't do a bunch of rework. And having all of those things thought about, how are we going to do that? Think about that ahead of time and define that. Or yeah, you can do it as you learn, but know that that's where things break, and let's talk about it. A lot of Scrum is just talking to each other and saying, how are we going to do this?
Well, it is very much. I was smiling because I've been to this mobile app and gaming industry a bit, and this is where you actually learn with a couple of million of downloads and over, say so, from the level of 1 million monthly active users, you really, really learn what is the quick feedback from your customer.
Oh, yeah.
All these people who are using in a B2C segment your apps or your games, they are complementing this or really putting bad opinions and 1 stars or 5.
Yeah, no, if you're doing,
if it's put globally, like if the product is shipped all over the stores, then you work 24/7 actually.
Video game companies have to react really, really fast. And I've worked with a number of them, all of them using Scrum, because again, they have to respond, as you were just saying, to their customers and their gamers really fast, because those bad reviews are going to come in, and all of a sudden their appearance in the App Store and Metacritic or whatever is going to drop fast.
True. However, as you mentioned, working together, working in one room, it's very much it's very much about what cooperation is about. Working together, putting people first, and here is everyone knows that one of the agile values says that we should put people above processes. But on the other hand, framework is also a certain process. I mean, kind of structuring of work, which if you don't follow, then you don't really benefit from it. So my question is, how do you manage your team well to implement more law to the people, as you mentioned in your book,
right,
a rule, and set the people first, at the same having the right structure?
So any process is waste, right? It just is, whether it's Scrum or whether it's anything else. But you have to have some, otherwise you can't get things done. And so what is the minimum? Often I talk about the minimum viable bureaucracy. You have to have some, and you have to, but you'd want just enough. And again, that's going to depend on your context. If you're doing human implantable medical devices, you want to have a lot of process so you don't kill people. If you're updating an app, you could probably do it with a little less process. Or, it's sort of how much process do you need? Because Scrum, in some of the original thinking about it, is based in complex adaptive systems theory. And this is developed in the 80s at at some of the labs in the United States. And this guy came up with invented artificial life. Every programmer is familiar with artificial life. And he talked about, and he did a lot of research, is what happens when you have more or less rules. And if you have too many rules, the whole thing freezes, right? This is classic, simulation, in software. If you have too many rules, the whole thing freezes, doesn't do anything. And if you have too few rules, it's just chaos, right? It just explodes. The whole simulation explodes. But if you have just enough, what's at that edge of chaos? That's when you have the fastest evolution.
Right.
And so that's sort of the idea, is that, groups of humans are also complex adaptive systems. That's how we are. We're a bunch of independent agents with rules and stuff. So how do we work it right at that edge of chaos that works in our context? There needs to be some process, because some of the things that, one of the problems I've seen in Agile implementations, I think sort of hinted at this earlier, is that engineers will say, well, there's no process, right? Individuals' interactions over processes and tools. We don't want your process. We can do whatever we want. It's like, no. There needs to be focus. There needs to be prioritization. There needs to be, how are we going to deliver all of that kind of stuff. There needs to be enough process that you deliver value. And how much that process is going to depend on your context. And then here's the hard part, is that's going to change from time to time, even with the same team, right? You're going to be doing different kinds of things, and you might need different processes. And that's the thing. Fundamentally, what Scrum is a learning framework. How can the organization as a whole become a learning organization? Because it's not like, oh, we're going to transform ourselves into an Agile organization. Like, Agile transformations are a huge thing. You see them on the magazines, the business magazine, all that kind of stuff. That's not something that ends. That's a state of being, because what you're doing today, as we started this conversation, what you're doing today is not going to be what you need to do for success tomorrow, or 6 months, or a year from now. And you're going to have to change it. So the whole point of Scrum is, how do we get at an organizational level, become a learning organization and be able to adapt to the rapid changing environment, especially in technology. As all technologists know, it's just crazy how fast it's changing. How do we have an organization that can adapt to that change? Because organizations that don't adapt,
they die.
We've all seen a lot of these big companies go away over the past couple of years, right? Because they didn't adapt fast enough.
True. I think you just answered my next question, which was about implementing Scrum. And because implementing Scrum and being agile in a small startup versus a large corporation, two different challenges, obviously.
Yeah. And, so there's Scrum. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Large corporate businesses, they feel somehow, I think, locked in by a size of processes, operations, and they still, if they decide to implement and scale Scrum, what should they look first at, you think, and foremost?
So Scrum Inc does a lot of this kind of work with large corporations across the globe, in Europe, in India, and in the United States, and England. And so here's exactly how we do it. Is we go in, and the first thing we do is we say, okay, how do we work now? Let's talk to people, interviews and sort of like, what's the current state? Understanding what does done mean? How fast can you deliver? Because there's sort of different dimensions of organizational agility. Can you deliver? How fast do you deliver? Can you change? Can you change what you're doing easily? Can you change that backlog and that prioritization? Is there prioritization? There are these different lenses that you can look at an organization of what the impact, because no one should do Scrum to do Scrum. You should do Scrum to deliver value, to do something. It's not a process for itself. It's to deliver value to the customer. And then what we do is we say, okay, let's get a leadership team. You want to start as high as you can, right? But, whether it's a business unit, whether it's the C-suite, whether it's, just whatever, a project, but you want it, and you say, okay, leadership, let's pick what part of this group can we sort of carve off that's independent enough that it's not going to be crushed by everything else. So it's like, it's independent enough that they can deliver value, at least somewhat independently. Maybe they still need to give it to another group of teams for delivery. I mean, we know that's a problem. We'll figure out independent paths to production later. But let's just carve off an area and try it there. And maybe it's 50 people, 100 people, 150 people. Those sort of numbers are usually about the easiest ones to do, because you do need to figure out, okay, what is the prioritization pathway? How does that work? And then what that sort of goes down. And then what's the impediment pathway, where people in the teams are saying, this is what's getting in our way. So how do those two things go back and forth? How does that feedback loop work? And then you start it in one area and you get it. So it's like a reference model. It's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be, because I see people I see consulting companies will come in, like, they will spend a year studying the problem and come up with a really nice PowerPoint deck describing the problem. But it's important to start trying stuff, because you only learn by doing in an organization. So you start there and you make a reference model. Say, okay, it works pretty well there. We've learned some of the issues that this group can control. We've learned some of the issues that are just organizational, which this group can't control. What is in scope, what is out of scope? I mean, there's some people, this one group is saying, well, we have to hand it off to this other business that we have no control over, and so we can't get done until this other part of the business, does whatever they're doing. And I was like, okay, so your definition of done is passing it to them, because that's within your control. You can't control them. That's okay. What can you do? What's your locus of control where you can affect change? And you can't change everything. So you do it in one area, you get this reference model, and then you start replicating it across. And so we actually just did this case study, and you can find it on the Scrum Inc website, with John Deere in their global IT group, which, I don't know, 5,000, 10,000 people. And so they started unit by unit and went through the whole organization. Now they have like 10,000 people in a Scrum at scale, structure. But they did it piece by piece, and they figured out what the issues were. How do they get those prioritization pathways? What's the problems? What are the organizational problems? What can global IT control, and what can't they? Right? There's certain things that are going to be thrown on a global IT group that they're like, oh God, I can't believe the business is doing this to us again. But okay, they can't control it. But then how do they get more feedback into the business side to say, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's how we can impact change. Here's how we can impact the customer faster. And that's what they did, sort of rolled through it. So that's exactly how Scrum Inc does it when we go in and do it. And we've worked at companies that are as large as, 100,000 people. Do you do 100,000 people all at once? No. Because that's really risky. If you do 100,000 people all at once overnight, things are going to break. So start. There's one of my customers who leads an organization of about 75,000 people, who says, think big, start small, go fast, which I love.
Also start now.
I told him, I'm stealing that. Think big, start small, go fast.
Yeah, I totally agree. However, best line from your book I really loved, it was start now. Start now, not someday. Start now with a small thing, and then move further. Yeah?
I was in a meeting last night with this group that I'm a team member of this group, it's not part of the Scrum Inc. It's like an external thing where we're doing, and they're talking about, oh, well, maybe we should delay. This isn't going to be perfect if we do this release in this quarter. Maybe we delay it into the next quarter in Q1 and start that. And I was sort of the one who had been pointing out some of the issues with the product. And it's like, this needs to be fixed. And I said, you know what? We should actually just release it imperfectly. I was like, don't wait. We know what some of the issues are. And I'm sorry if my attitude of we should fix these problems came off as we shouldn't release it. We should release it knowing those problems are there. But the right fix to the problems we'll only learn if it's out in the world being used by customers, being, tested, that kind of thing. Then next quarter, we can fix some of the problems that even the ones we know about. And so, and it just gets better, but also we're going to learn, like I have opinions on what I think the next priorities should be to fix some of these problems. But you know what? When a customer actually uses it, I'm like, oh, wow, it's not the problem I thought it was going to be. This other problem I hadn't thought of is really what we need to fix next, because I actually have people using it.
Got you. When we're talking about creating value and starting a project as a new thing and introducing the Scrum, what do you think, what metrics should we choose so we can quickly see progress and build team happiness and customer satisfaction, at least. I mean, how to effectively evaluate it, because value is a great work, and you can say it's a part of like useful code, useful thing that's being developed. However, any KPIs here?
So actually, I just wrote about this for the next edition of the book, and I found this really interesting. So the other day, I was having coffee with the person who used to be the lead technologist at the FBI. And I wrote about this in the first book about the Sentinel project, and he was Jeff Johnson, and he was the leader of changing their sort of case file system and having all of their documents and records and knowledge. Okay, and he said the metric he used, both with leadership and with the teams, and I thought this was brilliant, was speed to awareness. How long does it take from some FBI agent saying, hey, I made this arrest or I found this piece of intelligence, to get into the knowledge management of the FBI that the FBI or the whole of the FBI is aware of it? How long does that take? And you can measure that. That's measurable. And then I was talking to the head of John Deere Global IT, who's now at American Airlines. And I said, what did you measure? Because I was really interested. And they measured three things, as I said, in terms of what they were trying to accomplish. And so what is this? And it was very similar. The speed to understanding. How fast can they understand what's happening in the marketplace, what the customer needs, what's changing in technology? Then it's the speed of decision making. Okay, now that they have the understanding, how fast can they make a decision based on that understanding? Again, something you can measure, right? Problem becomes visible. How long does it take? You put it in a tool, it's really easy to track. Okay, it's been sitting there for 3 weeks. We haven't made a decision. Well, that's pretty slow. We should make that faster. And then from there, then it's speed to execution was the third metric they used. And so a lot of times Scrum teams will focus on velocity, like how many points or stories the team is getting done. And velocity is great for the team itself to do it, but it's an internal metric and a planning metric, not how much value creation, because you can really rapidly make the wrong thing. Like you remember Nokia, they had 90% of the cell phone market, and they were really, really good Scrum. They had really great Scrum teams, really quickly making the wrong thing that no one wanted. So, and so it's, what is that value? And it does depend, and it varies by what you're doing. But how fast, in terms of speed delivery, you can get what you're creating into the hands of the people who it's creating value for, so you can get that feedback. And really focus on delivery of value. And sometimes it's hard to figure out. Like if you're an internal, like how do you, like you're working in a call center, what's the delivery of value if you're an internal call center, and you're sitting in a cubicle in the Philippines? What is that value? And it takes, and it's like, okay, well, maybe it's speed to resolution, right? Maybe it's driving down, how many calls are about this specific problem because we fixed the problem, or, those kind of things. And so thinking about what value your team or team of teams or organization creates, how fast can you deliver it? And that requires some thought. Like, what does the value mean? But if you start with value, and how do you measure how fast you're delivering value and you're getting faster at doing it? But it's not velocity, it's value.
Okay. Wasn't the story about FBI classified? Am I still safe here?
Yeah, no, that story's safe. I got approval from the FBI to tell it. Because there was a software project that they failed a lot of times, and the government had a lot of public hearings about why it was so bad, and then Jeff went in and fixed it and was able to release it. And again, there's a lot of people in the American Congress who's like, why are we wasting hundreds of millions of dollars on this project that doesn't deliver any value?
Okay, good. Well, I'd like to make some comments also on your book. I went through, and I have some bookmarks here and some takeaways. So this is just for your kind of quick comment. I'm just reading the takeaway, and if you can make a kind of expression on this or explanation if it's kind of uncertain to me.
Sure.
So starting from the title, faster performance, better results, starting now. This is the title of the book. And in the book, you actually write, don't wait to make a decision. 1 hour. That's a goal. And
Yeah.
do you consider starting now to be the most important thing in Scrum?
Yeah, because you can't learn if you just admire your problem or admire the thing you're going to do. You're not going to actually do anything. And again, it's just like going back to the value. Quickly deliver a value. Some of your decisions are going to be wrong. I mean, I usually assume half my decisions are the wrong decision. But making a decision educates me on what the wrong decision is.
Right. Do you know, in a word, how the rugby game differs from American football game?
Rugby versus football.
I will tell you, not to put you wrong, rugby is a continuous game. It's more like a Kanban. While American football is a scoring game. It's like a very much increment-oriented game. And then coming to your 3-5-3 of Scrum, it was the title. Doesn't this sound like a match tactic?
So it's a continuous sort of Kanban team. It depends on what you're doing. Like if you're in a call center, having sort of continuous flow model makes a lot of sense, right? If you're doing software design, maybe it doesn't. And so it depends. Again, what are you doing? What makes sense for your team? But the 3-5-3 is no matter what. I don't care if you're doing Scrum or not. You have to figure out a way to prioritize. You have to figure out how the team is going to deliver. What does delivery mean? What does value mean? And you have to figure out a way of getting things out of the team way or things that are slowing the team down, impediments.
Got it.
Whether you're doing Agile or not, you got to figure that out somehow. And I'll tell you, if there's a better way than Scrum, I'll totally take and do that. And I work for a company called Scrum Inc. But those things are what Scrum does, and that's the basic core of the framework. It's just that.
Got it. You also wrote keep the rules to a minimum. So would it be that a reasonable minimum you just mentioned?
I would say that's the minimum. That 3-5-3, the 3 rules, the 5 events, the 3 artifacts. That's the minimum. Now, it depends what you're going to do. You're going to have more, like, okay, what is your testing criteria? What is your release criteria? What is your quality criteria? What is, all of that kind of stuff is going to vary by what you're doing, right? If you're releasing video games, it's very different than if you're making cars or brakes or heart, implants. Those are just different things.
True. Another part I really like is what, just quoting, next time you have a meeting to make decisions, run a clock and add up the sum cost of the meeting. I mean, the salaries of the people, hourly rates, including everybody in the room. Have you tried that?
Yeah. When I got all my senior leadership together at Scrum Inc., that cost about $10,000 an hour.
Wow.
Maybe half a day. I can't remember the exact thing, but it's really expensive. And actually, so my COO, who usually, facilitates the leadership meetings, will come in and say, this meeting is really expensive. So we need to be really productive. What's the value of this meeting? These are the decisions we need to make. The output of the meeting is going to be this, because having all of these really highly paid people in the room is really expensive. So
yeah,
let's do it. And so at Scrum Inc., it's the only place I've ever worked that does it. If you're like 30 seconds late to a meeting, like on a Zoom call or whatever, the first thing you do is you apologize. Like, oh, I'm sorry I'm late because meetings start on time. And at the end of the meeting, people are like, boop, drop, because the meeting is over. It's the time box, and it forces focus.
Right. What I really like also is half done isn't done at all. And don't be busy, be done.
Yeah. And what that is if you're working on something, and people do this all the time. They work on something and they're like, get their little piece done, or they're halfway done, but they're working hard, right? They're working hard, but it can't go out the door. All of their work is not valuable. It's waste, right? Because you put energy and effort and money into something that you can't get value from. If you have a half-built car, you can't sell the car. So you want to measure how many cars are coming off the line, not how busy are the workers who are putting cars together, because who cares?
True. I really like one line about the culture, that culture actually creates some kind of structure, and structures are difficult to change, and change your culture, change your limits. Like free on limits.
I would actually put it a little, is that the structure determines what your culture is.
Is it? Okay.
Because if you have a rigid hierarchical structure, your product will be rigid, hierarchical, hard to change. Your culture will reflect that. So it's called Conway's Law. So something that was discovered in the 1970s. And so the classic example is this: if you have 4 teams working on a compiler, you're going to have a 4-pass compiler, no matter what. And so your organizational structure affects your product structure. And then it also says, well, how are we working together is going to determine what our culture is. Are we a supportive, collaborative environment, or are we taking really strict orders from the top, and we have to follow them, and there's a bunch of this? Because I see all the time, you go into these corporations, and they have like their mission statement, their culture statement, carved into the wall when you go into their headquarters. How many people take that seriously? That's really easy. Talking about culture is really easy. Changing the structure, because the structure will do it. Going after culture is important. And that's part of its mindset, part of its interaction, part of it's that. But the most powerful way I've found of changing a culture is changing its structure.
Got it. Thanks very much, JJ.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you for having you today. I have one more question. What is the mission of your organization, Scrum Incorporated? And
Sure.
You lead this organization. How? Because you are American company, US based. However, how do you can provide some expertise and help companies based in Poland, Europe, who want to implement agile projects faster, with better results, and who want to start now?
Well, the mission of Scrum Inc. is to spread the power of Scrum globally. And so Scrum Inc., we actually do consulting with global companies. Some European companies, some American companies, but most companies, large companies these days, have offices across the globe. A lot in Europe. As you know, there's a lot of software development for global companies in Poland. I've talked to people who have a lot, do a lot of, setting up units in Warsaw. The other part is we have a European entity that's based in London. And we have consultants who work all over the continent. I mean, I know where people now. There's somebody in Prague right now. There's somebody in Hamburg. There's a bunch of people in London. So we work as consultants doing this kind of agile transformation work across the globe. We are an American-based company, but I would actually say our fastest growing business unit is our European operations. That's by far the fastest because there's so much need in Europe for this, as in Poland, in Hungary, in England, it's a huge opportunity. And I think, especially Poland, I've done some Scrum training in Poland in the past, pre-pandemic, and there's such a large community of software developers, of technologists, and they all, because listen, engineers want to get cool stuff built, right? That's what engineers do. That's what motivates them, and which really excites me. And so working with the Polish community, working with engineers and people in Poland is really exciting, because Poland is such a dynamic, fascinating country with really, so much skill, so much talent, and so much opportunity that, I just think that there's a lot of work there, and we're able to do that because we do operate quite extensively in Europe.
Thank you for saying that. And on behalf of this community based here, I was honored to have you, and I really enjoyed that. Thank you. Anyone wants to contact JJ, go to scruminc.com. Thank you, JJ, and have a great afternoon.
Have a good one.